So friends, here's the truth that realtors are hiding from you. When you enter, including the Batumi market, what crucial information are you missing? You are not receiving enough information to make your investments as safe as possible and with minimal risks. The fact is, the outcome you get depends greatly on the information you receive. This video is perfect for those who have heard all sorts of opinions and are wondering, how do I make sense of all this? For those who already have a stack of residential complexes like this, or even more apartment options, and it's confusing, it's unclear, everything is a mess in your head, this video will be just right for you. You will get the maximum benefit here, everything will fall into place for you. And I think you'll like it. You've definitely been in this situation. You look at one residential complex, get an opinion from one expert. Great, awesome. Then another says, no, that's total nonsense, don't buy it. And it's like that for almost every product, for many situations where you're trying to get answers. And this really confuses you, misleads you, and creates some kind of alternative picture of the world, which most often gets further and further from reality. This happens because most people who share their view of the world with you are pursuing their own interests. In other words, their goal is not to describe the real picture of the world. Their goal is to present some kind of alternative so that you take action toward one product or another. And that's exactly why you experience dissonance in your mind, and that's why you end up with a certain uncertainty which naturally irritates and frightens you. Basically, any epithets can be applied here. That's why it's extremely important, and the purpose of this video is to show you a picture and a situation as close to reality as possible. Information that you could say matches reality. Only this way can you make a well-informed decision and get what you came to this market for. Naturally, this video will take investments into account with a focus on investing. And since, for the most part, I talk about real estate specifically for investment purposes, so let's get started. By the way, right here you can check out a very useful file, 7 strategies. There I have outlined the main strategies of people who come to this market with the goal of making money. And they either achieve results or they don't. What results they get from different strategies is described there in detail. Take a look. A friend of mine, before he came to me, said he was searching. He had already been looking for a year and a half, going through a ton of residential complexes. And when we started talking about why he still hadn't bought anything, he said, I just don't understand. He said, I have a huge selection. I don't understand where to invest my money, and I have a kind of inner, let's say, disharmony, if I can put it that way. So we analyzed the situation together and got down to real facts and real numbers. And after all that, he called me a few days later and said, Evgeny, I'm ready. And he told me it was because everything had finally fallen into place for him. And it's important to understand here that it's not that he's somehow wrong or special. The issue is that there are too few technologies, too little information, and it's not publicly available. In other words, there are strategies that professionals use, but they use them for themselves. They often don't publish them, and they don't share them. They simply make money from them. These strategies are successful and effective. But first of all, there aren't many of them. Secondly, you often won't hear about them from realtors, who usually have almost nothing to do with investments or making money. And today that's exactly what we're going to talk about. Any professional who enters the market always starts with the numbers. This behavior is most often characteristic of people who are used to earning a lot and earning well from real estate professionally. But when an ordinary person comes to the market, they often start listening to a lot of different opinions. And the problem is that, as I already mentioned, these opinions are often far from reality. If a professional can quickly get to the real picture using numbers, an ordinary person, wandering among all these different opinions, often gets very confused. And of course, that's where all the downsides come from. That's why we're now going to start with the first, so to speak, truth, and get to the main information about what's happening in this market, so that it's easy and clear for you. So that you have the foundation on which you can truly make a decision and take action. This is the most important thing, because you can spend a long time sitting and choosing, switching from one country to another to a third, but there's no point in that, because every country essentially has its own problems, and in every country there is a lot of illiquid real estate. If you think that Dubai is much better than Georgia, or that Thailand is much better than Dubai, or vice versa, that's absolutely not the case. Every country has its own real estate that grows well in value and becomes more expensive, but as a rule, there is very little of it naturally. And there is a huge amount of junk that people are trying to sell by all possible means. The truth is, there's a lot more informational noise about junk properties than about the real estate you can actually make money on. Why? Because it needs to be sold? Real estate that isn't very good, not very great. It really does need to be sold. It doesn't sell itself. And usually it's being advertised from all sides. And of course, there's also the effect of marketing. The ones who spend more money on advertising, the ones whose images you see more often, are the ones people buy more frequently. That's a thing too. But that doesn't equal profitability. It doesn't mean profit. It simply means marketing tools that sell. So if you rely solely on marketing tools, on those images, on those familiar pictures, on those repeated opinions, of course, you'll often fall into these traps. That's why I'm starting to tell you about the realities of the market. And we'll start with truth number one. Truth number one is that you won't make any decent, reasonable money in the economy segment here. Money that would actually make you happy. Why? Because this is cheap housing. It comes with a whole range of characteristics, and naturally most of them are negative. These are cheap facades. Often there are problems with elevators, with electricity, with the facades themselves, as I already mentioned, with sound and waterproofing and many other things. And as a rule, there's no maintenance at all. So no matter what pictures they show you, even if some of them seem appealing to you, beautiful, pleasant at first glance, considering that these buildings are either not maintained or are maintained very poorly, your property will quickly fall into disrepair, so to speak. In other words, it loses its liquidity as quickly as possible. That's the first reason. And the second reason why you won't make money on it, it's because this kind of property is bought by people with very, very limited budgets. In other words, the main goal for such a person is to save as much as possible. Even if you bought it for just $500 per square meter without any finishing, believe me, the person who will buy it from you will have exactly the same goal. They will keep searching and sifting through listings until they find the same low price, and that's the one they'll buy. So it's practically impossible to beat them in this race. Even if you end up with some laughable profit of $50 to $100 per square meter spread out over the years, believe me, that's not something worth pursuing. It's not something you should be aiming for or thinking about, especially if you want to do expensive renovations in an economy class property to increase its value. You should always remember that no matter how much money you pour into it, the people who will buy it simply won't appreciate it. Because for them, the main criterion isn't quality or design or anything else, it's the price. And they'll buy from you only when you offer them the best price. That's why when it comes to economy class properties, we just pass them by in this market. They make up 80% of it. A lot of people want to buy them, but again, the question is at what price? That's a big question. By the way, here's an article about the drawbacks of construction. There's a link in the description. Click the link, you can read it. I've described in detail there what the downsides of economy class residential complexes are, just in case anyone's interested, so you can see it clearly for yourself. Now let's talk about the comfort class. These make up about 18% of the market here. There are already plenty of comfort class residential complexes on the market today, and their main characteristic is that their prices don't really go up much. They have their own price ceiling, and the developers who are building these properties now, they often, well, not often, almost always end up being more expensive than the secondary market. And the main problem is that these residential complexes, many of them are still under construction, 8 to 9 years. Just keep that in mind. Probably the minimum time frame we can consider is 5 years, but on average it's 8 to 9. And here is an article, read it as well. There I've described some examples of such residential complexes, just so you can understand. Out of about 20 in this segment for the comfort class for living, the really good ones where you can at least live more or less comfortably, there are about 8, really only about 8 residential complexes. You can buy and live in them. And what's very important, as I mentioned, new builds in this segment, whether it's Alley of Heroes or New Batumi, are more expensive than the secondary market. What does that mean? It means that right now you can already buy ready-to-move-in housing for $300 to $500 per square meter. That's cheaper than new construction in the same segment, which you'd have to wait for about 5 to 9 years. So there's absolutely no point in investing in a new build in the comfort segment. And so far to this day, I haven't seen any other examples of undervalued residential complexes in this segment, because if there were any, I would gladly be offering them, selling them, and showing how much you could earn from them. But unfortunately, I just don't see any at the moment. The next very important point about the comfort segment is the rental yield. And many people go there to grow their money somehow, to earn from renting. Forget it, up to 5% per year, that's it. Again, I haven't seen a single case where people manage to earn more in any way. I'm talking specifically about net profit, not gross. And the second problem with renting in this segment is that almost all management companies blatantly deceive us. Here you could say that bad management companies show you one number of rented days, but in reality it's another. So basically you end up not getting all your profits and so on, but I would think about why this is happening. Because if people are doing this, they must have some motivation, and especially if almost everyone is doing it, then that motivation must be very strong. So the strength of this motivation lies in the fact that the rental price is low, meaning your rental rate is somewhere between $40 and $70. Often it's around $50 for a studio in the comfort class segment. What does this tell you? It tells you that the net profit you receive, first of all, is quite small, around 20. You get a little over $20 if it's rented out for 50 per day, so that's how much you get net. But the problem is also that the management companies renting these out make even less profit, because they have a lot of overhead costs, attracting clients, cleaning, maintenance, check-in, check-out. Basically, there's a lot involved. And their margin is very, very small. In other words, if they work with you honestly, it's actually easier for them to just shut down their business rather than work with you. Because with that kind of rental rate, there's simply no profitability. That's just a statement of fact. And that's why they make up for this lack of profitability by increasing the number of days that essentially they underpay, meaning they give you more days but show you a lower number, so they end up with some profitability and some motivation to keep working. And in this way, they can keep operating, earn money, pay salaries to their employees, and so on. So when I try to explain to you that when this behavior is not just from 1, 2, or 3, but from the majority of market players, it means there is a reason behind it. And this reason is exactly what I have just explained to you. And the next problem that follows is that many people come here thinking, I want to buy on the first line because rentals are better there. There are more clients, so I'll be making a decent profit. Well, rentals are more or less okay, yes, but off-season they're really weak, and during the season occupancy is more or less normal. But the question is at what price? And on the first line there are also additional drawbacks for you. There are a lot of residential complexes on the first line, meaning there's a lot of competition. And on this same first line there aren't any non-branded residential complexes that would bring you more than 5% annual return. In fact, it's often just 2 to 4% per year there. That's a return where honestly it's easier to just put your money in the bank than to bother with renting, buying, selling, managing, overseeing, and so on. So there's no point in investing in real estate for money at that rate of return. Unless, of course, you need or want to live in that property for 3 months and let it sit empty the rest of the time. In that case, invest wherever you want, choose any location, it really doesn't matter to you. But if you're after returns, if you're looking to make money, then it makes absolutely no sense. That's just a stereotype, and it's only a stereotype because it's simply not true. Here on the first line, there's the kind of return everyone is chasing, the one everyone dreams about. Yes, there are some people who don't listen to anyone. They come, they buy, they see for themselves. But then you can see these hundreds of apartments up for sale because they didn't get what they wanted. They bought, they played around, they thought, we're going to outsmart everyone, trick everyone, and make that amazing return. But in most cases, at least I haven't seen any positive examples, it just didn't happen. And here again, there's a table you can look at. I've laid out the rental prices and locations for you, so you can get a general idea of what the rental rates are in different areas, as well as the property prices, so you can roughly understand the returns. Take a look. I think you'll find it interesting and useful as well. The next truth is that when you buy brands in residential complexes, almost always you're buying here a pseudo brand. What does that mean? There's a brand in your building. Naturally, it has nothing to do with you. Just because there's a brand in your building doesn't mean you'll get a better tenant, higher prices, or any other advantages. Nothing at all. The brand's infrastructure is paid for separately, which basically means it doesn't exist for you. And of course, developers make money off of this. They sell the idea that, look, our building has status, our building has a brand, so you're living in a prestigious place. And basically this whole pitch, this whole story. But in reality, in truth, it doesn't give you any advantages at all. No matter how cheap or expensive the brand in your building is, you don't get anything out of it whatsoever. Because the end consumer, the person coming to rent your apartment, is looking at what they actually get. What kind of finish do I get? What do I actually receive? What level of service is provided? And most importantly, what kind of infrastructure do I get? So you need to understand that today, for example, if you're renting out your apartment, short term, you can't go beyond the range of $50 to $70 per night during the season. And I'm talking about prices during the season. Off season, they're around $20 to $30. So that's the $50 to $70 range. You can't go beyond that just by offering your tenant square meters. If you want to break out of that range, you need to provide infrastructure. And here the question arises, what kind of infrastructure can I offer? Can I offer a pool, a fitness center, a spa? Can I offer a good restaurant? Can I offer something else like a children's area? Can I offer a whole bunch of things that people are willing to pay extra for? In other words, a person arrives, gets some kind of complex, and is willing to pay more for that complex. So in Batumi today, there are no ordinary residential complexes. There are no such complexes where your tenant could pay more and you could provide them with these amenities. Only a few complexes have paid infrastructure. But again, you can add the cost of this paid infrastructure to the rent and they will pay for it. Or you will pay for it, but again, it won't bring you any profit. That's why this is a big problem. If there is a genuine branded residential complex where you are buying a pure brand, you can't live there, you can only rent it out. But out of all the residential complexes currently on the market, they have already reached their final price. Yes, they did go up in price quite nicely, a few of them especially, but today you can still buy into them, though the price is already around $4,000 to $4,500. In other words, there won't be any further growth because the brand level there is such that the price doesn't rise to $7,000 to $9,000 except for one brand. And you won't make money on price growth. So basically, you can put your money there purely for rental yield, for example, by buying at $4,000 per square meter. And you'll get your 8 to 10% annual return, depending on the brand and the apartment. Well, in short, you need to calculate and work it out. Overall, you can already find a more or less completed branded apartment or one close to being finished. Buy it and simply earn purely from the rental income. But of course, if you want to protect yourself a bit more, it's better to buy the same brand at $1,000 or $1,500 per square meter higher. When it first entered the market here, it was about $2,500 to $2,600 per square meter. So you have both appreciation and rental income. If you calculate the rental yield based on the initial amount of $2,500, it's not the same yield as at $4,000 per square meter. So you understand what I'm talking about. And that's why, of course, to increase your rental yield, it's more attractive for you to buy good brands in residential complexes at a lower price. By the way, in branded residential complexes, those very problems with infrastructure have been solved. Back in the 1950s, brands in America and Europe already realized that if you provide tenants with decent service, and not just square meters, but also infrastructure and a design that suits them, note, it doesn't have to be the best, it just has to suit them. If you give them what suits them, then everything is fine. The person pays well, there's a margin, there's a decent profit, and everyone is interested in that. But that's something people either don't understand or don't want to understand. Most developers who are building in this market today aren't building for the brand, but for people. The thing is, they take their profit anyway. I mean, they sold it to you at a good price, they had a decent margin, and they took it. As for what you will earn, they couldn't care less about that. All right, number 3 is about the Batumi market. And the question is, what can you really make money on here? Today, you can make money here in the business and premium segments because there's very little of it. It's only just starting to appear. Essentially, there's no competition at all. It's the same as when there was no comfort class here and it was just starting to emerge. And you can observe that when something new enters the market, it often comes in at the prices of the old segment. And that gives you that extra margin. Why? Because the price is from the old segment, but the actual final selling price is already from the new segment. That's where you get this margin. Some people made $300 per square meter from switching to the economy segment, some made $500, and in some cases even $1,000 per square meter. And why did this happen? Because they entered the right market segment, the right residential complex. But the truth is, people also lost money at that time. Why? Why? Because they invested in projects from developers who couldn't deliver on their promises. In other words, they said, we'll build a business class property. Before this, we built economy class. But in the end, they built something at the comfort level. And what's even more unfortunate is that some of them have been building it for 8 or 9 years already. So basically, they made a lot of empty promises, couldn't deliver, the construction dragged on for a very, very long time, and in the end, it wasn't business class, but rather comfort class, and even that was a compromise. And of course, you understand that under such circumstances, you can't expect business class prices there. Well, basically, it's just not possible. So if they started out building a business class property and expected, for example, that it would cost 3 to 3.5 million, now it costs, let's say, at most 2 million. Yeah, and well, if you spread all that out over 8 or 9 years, it's just sad. Yeah, and naturally, property prices aren't rising right now. People invested their money, some lost it, some ended up with a very, very small profit. So this isn't really about making money, it's just about playing at being an investor, playing around with real estate. And the same thing is happening now with business and premium class real estate. Yeah, sweet. It's sweet because you can make money. I mean, the final price of business and premium class real estate can easily be anywhere from $3,000 to $10,000 per square meter in Batumi. Easily. And people will buy it from you. But they'll only buy it under one condition. And that condition is very simple. This property has to attract people with money. In other words, people have to like it. They have to want to pay that kind of money for it. Whether it's the concept, the infrastructure, the finishes, the design, the quality, the attention to detail, the service, or many, many other aspects. The problem here is that these same wealthy people, those who are ready to pay that kind of money for this property, have seen a lot. If you're buying property from a developer who was building economy or comfort class housing just yesterday and today claims they'll build premium, something that happens very often in this market, don't believe it. It will never happen. Imagine you go to the Zhiguli factory or the Renault factory and they tell you, tomorrow we'll make you a Mercedes. Well, they won't. There's no way they'll be able to do that. That's just nonsense. So those who were building comfort class properties here just yesterday and don't have the expertise in any case, premium, but just like with previous market segments, they won't be able to build it. That is, maybe they'll manage to build Comfort Plus, and if you're really, really lucky, they might build Business Class. But naturally, all of this will affect the final price. For example, today they're selling it to you for $3,000 per square meter, but in the end it might even cost $2,500. Why? Because they couldn't handle it, they didn't make it, they didn't reach the level, and a wealthy person isn't willing to pay for that. The only ones willing to pay are those with smaller budgets who buy at a lower price, and there are actually many such examples. There are even such examples among the so-called major developers who are building very large projects here. On the first line, unfortunately, I can't mention the name. But if you go and read my articles, there are some hints there, so to speak. And this is very important. It's very important to have this understanding so that you don't fall into the same trap that many people are falling into now. So if you really want to play around with premium properties, if you want to buy real estate from a developer who, as of today, does not have proven expertise, do it at the price of the previous segment. That is, for example, if you're buying a business class property based on promises and renderings, and they offer it to you for 3, you need to understand that you should be buying it for 2. Why? Because then you have this cushion, a cushion for risk, as I call it. In other words, it's a risk buffer in case the developer doesn't deliver, can't handle it, or something goes wrong. You can always offload that property for 2. That's how professional savvy investors do it. If they see there's no verified appraisal, they buy at a price at which they can definitely sell the property, regardless of the developer's promises. This is very important. It's important so that you don't end up with just paper profits. Paper profits are when the price goes up on paper, but in reality, when you go to sell on the secondary market, for example, you bought for $3,500, but on the secondary market, that property is only worth $2,500. And that's it. There's not even any discussion that it could be worth more. But on paper it looked great. And by the way, many developers here use the tool. They impose a restriction on selling during the construction phase, meaning you can't resell the assignment you bought. This is done specifically to prevent these lower prices, so that people who are supposed to buy during construction don't see lower prices. But the truth is, when the building is completed, people still start selling the apartments they bought. When this restriction on assignment sales is lifted, these low prices appear anyway. And not only are you left with low prices, but you're also left with thousands of identical apartments that suddenly flood the market all at once. This is also a very, very big problem, believe me. You shouldn't get involved in such residential complexes. So what should you do if you really want to buy a great new segment with high margins? And how do you check the developer? It's very simple. You just look at what completed projects the developer has, go visit these completed properties and see how they are. They were built, and most importantly, not just how they were built, although that's also important but secondary. The main thing is what their current price is on the secondary market. And look at the price on the secondary market, not the price in listings, but find out the real price at which they're actually being sold. Because, for example, in the listings it might be shown at 2,700 per square meter, but in reality it's being sold for 2,200. Yes, this happens all the time, so you need the actual price at which these apartments are being sold for this developer on the secondary market. If tomorrow he promises you that, what do I have right now? On the secondary market, they're selling for 2,200, but the new residential complexes are a higher class, and now you're buying at 3,500. Why? Because we've significantly raised the standard, we've changed, we're growing, we're exploring new horizons, everything is getting better, everything is more expensive, and so on. Guys, I don't believe in that. That is, I believe it when I see confirmation in the market that the developer can actually deliver. It's about quality, and people on the secondary market are willing to pay for that quality. Only in this case can you assume, for example, that the developer has already built a segment and you're buying, say, a new segment that he promises will be better, and you buy it. There it's even 2,200, but you're buying the new segment at the same 2,200. So you're buying again with the same margin of safety. The margin in case he can't handle it, can't deliver, doesn't finish it, and so on. In simple terms, if he currently has confirmed prices, if the resale price is 2,200 and he's selling to you for 3,500, don't buy it. A simple solution, buy at the same price at which this developer actually sold these apartments, regardless of all his stories, promises, talk, and blah, blah, blah. Because you could end up in the red, and a huge number of people have fallen into this negative trap, just an insane number of people. And to this day, people keep falling into it. They buy, end up in the red, and so on and so forth. Truth number 7 is that if you want to earn a great return, you will in any case have to focus on the solvent segment of people. Because it's exactly these people who are willing to pay extra, exactly these people who are ready to pay a premium margin. So for example, you buy at 2, and then these people are willing to buy from you at $4,000 or $5,000 per square meter, and you end up with a crazy margin. And you need to satisfy the desires of these people. And a very important condition for meeting these people's desires is service. So if you have great service, if you have good design, if you have the necessary infrastructure for this segment of people, then overall everything will work well for you. The problem is that there are very few residential complexes like this. There are very few, and you need to know how to pick them out, because there are a huge number of residential complexes where, well, how should I put it, they just drew some pictures, tried to imitate these good complexes, but in reality, you know, to me it's like, right now in the automotive industry, it kind of reminds me of China and Germany. When China copied everything from Germany, maybe in some cases they even copied it well, but it doesn't have the same value as the German original. A copied Mercedes doesn't cost as much as a Mercedes, it costs like a copy. That's also very important. That's why you need to make sure the developer has a name and proven expertise, and that their products actually have value on the market. That's what I was talking about earlier. The next truth about this market is that many developers make you sign a management contract for 10 years. Yes, and if you sign a management contract, they say something like, we will rent out your apartment for the next 10 years and you will receive income. But the truth is, you don't actually receive any income. There are even cases where people had to pay extra for utilities a year after handing over their apartment, supposedly because their apartment wasn't being rented out. But it's all for the same reason he mentioned above. They rent it out, and since you have a management contract with them, you can't get out of it in any way, so you end up receiving that same low income for 10 years. If you want to resell such an apartment, you will naturally have problems because a buyer won't want to get involved in a situation where they can't use the apartment. And on top of that, they only get a meager return of 1 to 2% at best. So pay attention to this, and if you do sign a management contract, make sure to sign additional documents as well. Some papers that can offset or mitigate it, because many developers are obligated to have you sign since they have obtained tourist status. But if you sign an additional document stating that you can manage your property as you wish, then this can help you and solve this problem. In fact, I have prepared an excellent article for you, and by reading it, you can understand for yourself how to sign a contract that will greatly protect you from risks. Both the ones I just mentioned and many others. The article will appear right here now. Follow the link in the description and read it. I can confidently say that you probably won't get such a volume of concise information even from lawyers here, because these points are compiled specifically from the perspective of sales experience and property transactions. That is, from these points of view, lawyers often simply don't even think about these things. Another very important truth is that for the most part it is foreign investors and foreign buyers who are purchasing on the market, and hardly anyone talks about this either, and there are quite a few important points here that you need to know. The first point is that when demand comes from abroad, it has slightly different characteristics. In other words, the person is not buying from you to live there. They are mainly buying either to preserve their money and more often to make a profit. Because after all, most people want their money to not just sit there, but to grow somehow. And what's interesting is this. These people buy based on pictures, on expectations, on illustrated, on inflated expectations. And when they've waited for the construction, some longer, some shorter, some for a long time, they end up facing the fact that many become disappointed. And that's also a truth that very few people will tell you. What are they disappointed by? The quality of the building, the profitability, the attitude. In fact, they're disappointed by many things. Of course, not everyone. Some people are satisfied, but the number of assignments and people wanting to sell in comfort class buildings that they bought quite recently, well, it's actually quite a lot. I'm not going to give you a percentage right now, but just take my word for it. It's quite a large number. And of course, some will say, well, some people got in just to make money. No, that's not it. I personally talk to these people. Many people bought in planning to keep it for 5 or 10 years to rent it out. But after renting it out for a year and seeing that they're not getting paid a thing, they get rid of that property. Or some people bought that very product, the one they'd been waiting for, the one they wanted, and they were forced to sign a management contract. Again, they're not getting paid, so they try to sell too, but they can't, because the buyers, well, they're not stupid guys. And they don't want to get into that trap, right? With a signed management contract and no possibility of living there. There are cases like that too, and there are a lot of different cases. But the fact remains that external demand is different from internal demand. That is, if internal demand is someone who comes in and wants to live there, who buys for themselves to live in, then here the story is a bit different. Sometimes you'll see super cheap price tags, really great offers, seemingly in decent buildings, and there are 1, 2, 3 of them, but always think about why are people leaving this project? Why are they selling? Or why are there so many listings in this project? It's not a coincidence. It's not some random idea these people had. It's all about people coming face to face with reality. That's why everything I've told you above. You need to compare the promises with reality. It's very important because a person's expertise or their specialized skill and deep knowledge in a particular area lies in being able to accurately and reliably predict what you will actually receive or experience after all the various promises and claims that have been made by different developers. There is already a certain recognizable and established pattern that people with significant experience and insight can see, identify, and use to make informed predictions. And that's exactly what expertise is all about, how accurately you can anticipate and predict these parameters. Of course, this is important and as complete information as possible, but there are always some subtleties and nuances in different residential complexes that you just can't fit into a single video. That's a given. And if a realtor tells you the information I've just shared, then most likely they're thinking about your earnings, your money, your safety. But in most cases, that's not the case. You come in, it's like chatting with GPT. You say something, make a request, and it gives you what matches your query. In other words, they're not thinking about how to provide you with the best solution or how to keep you safe if your request doesn't actually lead you to the goal you need. It's pretty much the same thing in the real estate market with realtors. You come to a realtor and say, I need this. The realtor does their best to solve that problem for you. But if you make the wrong request, if you go in the wrong direction, no one will protect you from that, even if they know about it, because they have a different goal. Their goal is to make money. Their goal is to earn quickly and easily. And even if your goal doesn't match what you actually want, in the end, no one will tell you about it. And unfortunately, that's the reality of the market. You have to take this into account as well, and it's something you absolutely need to understand. What's the best way to study any market if you've entered a new one and want to learn about it? For example, if you don't have any information there, if you can't find it, study what people have lost money on and what they've made money on. Look at classifications, pay attention to value points, definitely to value points, the aspects that are truly important to people. Why do people overpay? What causes the higher price? All of these factors matter. Sometimes it's about status, sometimes it's about quality, but more often it's a combination of factors. Status, quality, and location all play a role. The uniqueness of the location is very important, as is the presence of infrastructure. These are crucial. So you gather this mix, analyze it, and in the end, if you've done everything right, you get the best possible result. A worldview as close to reality as possible, one you can rely on and use as a template to try on different residential complexes. You try one on, it doesn't fit. You try another, it doesn't fit. You try a third, it doesn't fit. And this, to some extent, at some point it actually becomes quite simple. The only difficulty might be that you'll have to spend quite a lot of time on this. It's understandable. Many people simply don't want to do this because everyone has their own priorities. They're not investment experts, and not everyone has the time to spend on it. First of all, not everyone has that time, and not everyone wants to do it. And in general, I want to tell you that finding a good specialist in any investment market is just as hard as finding a good doctor or a good lawyer. Why is that? Because first of all, not everyone truly loves what they do. Not everyone is so passionate about their work that they've dedicated a decade to it. Usually it's 10 years. That's the minimum amount of time it takes to become a good specialist in any field, whether it's music, cooking, or anything else. There is scientific evidence that 10 years is more or less the time it takes to grow. Well, it's a well-founded claim, but that's only if the person is actually growing and developing. There are plenty of specialists who have been in their profession for 20 years, but they don't know a thing, can't do anything, and don't want to learn. That's also very important to understand. It's like with doctors. You come in, and he's been sitting in that chair for ages, but the fact that he's been there so long doesn't mean anything at all. That's why it's important for you to look at the mission and the values. In other words, if a person is developing, if this is both their work and their hobby, their mission, and they live for it, then there's a high probability that they'll want to give you the very best result. Why? Because that's what they live for. It's their entire creative fulfillment. It's like a musician who wants to compose some amazing piece. He's completely immersed in it. If he doesn't achieve that result, he won't show it at all. He won't show you that piece. But if it's great, he'll play it, enjoy it, and take pleasure in it, because he achieved the creative fulfillment he wanted. It's the same with specialists in investments or in any other field. If a person lives for this, if they truly enjoy it, then you'll definitely get results with them. Up to 98 to 99% certainty that you'll get the results you came for. Until next time. Bye!